Hey guys, welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about colorblind racism, the theory of colorblind racism. It comes to us from a theorist named Eduardo Bonilla Silva, and it has a very simple argument. The argument is that to say that you are colorblind in the context of a society with institutional discrimination means that your belief is going to not change anything, and it's going to contribute, therefore, to racial inequality. That's the whole thing. Um, I'm going to give you examples, but what I want to get you to think about is the idea of society as having these social institutions in which discrimination is built into them, and society having a culture. And in this case, and the culture being beliefs, ideas about things, color blindness in any one of these versions, these are going to be the four different examples of colorblind ideologies that Bonilla Silva is going to draw our attention to. He's going to say, or I am going to say, I'm going to say that these should be thought of as complementary ideologies to structural racism. If you have, and complementary meaning like in terms of geometry, which I'm sorry, that's a little bit nerdy, but back when you took geometry, there was a thing called complementary angles. So the angles, one angle would be like this, and then the other angle would be like that, and together they would form a perfect 90-degree or 180-degree angle. So they were complementary in the sense that they added together to make something. The point I want to make here is that any of these can be thought of as complementary ideologies. Ideologies, part of our culture, that work perfectly, even though they're not racist, they work perfectly with racist institutions to create racial outcomes. So even though these, well, he says that these aren't racist ideologies. Certainly liberalism isn't. We'll make the argument that naturalization isn't either. And really this one as well. So cultural racism kind of still is, but the argument here is that any of these I don't see race, I treat all people the same ideologies in the context of structural racism is going to produce racist outcomes. So let's go through each of them. The first, liberalism, he calls this a frame of colorblind racism. So liberalism, this takes us back to John Locke. Liberalism is basically this idea that individuals should be free to pursue their own self-interest with minimal government intervention. Government should step in if one person is kind of treading on somebody else, but otherwise government should stay out of it. So if you think about that, there's nothing racist in that. It's in fact completely egalitarian. The problem is that if we have a society that right now is structured in a way that has created an easier path to wealth for the average white person, not that all white people have an easy path to wealth, but on average it's easier for a white person than a black person, or a white person than a brown person. If you have that, then this sort of Lockean liberal ideology that says government should stay out of people's lives and every person should be free to pursue their own wealth, well, you're starting then with an unequal playing field. If my family was able to, if my grandfather was able to afford a house because the government was giving out low interest loans back in the 1940s and 1950s, which is true, that all actually happened. But almost all of those, over 90% of those loans went to white people, which meant a 50-year-old black man in my position his grandfather didn't have access to that loan. That's going to mean that my grandfather was able to buy that house, sell that house, help my parents buy a house. They were able to then help my wife and I buy a house. And none of that would have had the same degree of ease that a black person or a brown person in America would have had. The liberal perspective of let them go out and pursue their own wealth, yeah, we're playing the same game, right? We're trying to get college educations. we're trying to buy a home, but I've got an advantage in that situation. Liberalism in this context of structural racism is going to produce racist outcomes. Okay, that's liberalism. 5 minutes in, I think we're okay. Second one is naturalization. This one you wouldn't have heard of. Basically, it says racial inequalities are attributable to natural or biological human tendencies. Black people are this way, white people are this way, brown people are this way. None of them are none of them are bad. We're not being racist here. We're just saying people are different. And you know what? One of the things people like, white people like to live around white people, and black people like to live around black people. Latino people like to live around Latino people. And there's nothing racist in that. It's fine. But what you end up with in that way of thinking is segregated housing, which segregated housing in the context of that whole wealth thing that I just talked about means that white people are going to kind of keep white neighborhoods together. Black people are going to keep black neighborhoods together, and there's no need for the government to step in because this is just people preferring to be around people of their own race. This kind of theory is going to lead to inequalities in first of all, in the housing markets. It means that people are not able to buy houses just wherever they want. It means that the government's not going to try to step in to ameliorate that. And where it really becomes an issue is in terms of neighborhood schooling. Schooling being paid for by property taxes in local neighborhoods, which is going to lead to the case that we have right now, where white kids have more government money spent on them via taxes than kids of color in terms of their schooling. All of it is not something we're going to address because we're just letting people live where they want to live. Now, I'm not saying, I don't know what the solution to that is. And Bonilla Silva is not necessarily saying government intervention needs to be the solution. All he's saying is if we look at sort of choices people make as based on just what they would prefer to do, we're ignoring the fact that they're making those choices within a system of structural racism to begin with. Okay, third one, and this one I have a harder time buying, but I'm going to give Bonilla Silva the benefit of the doubt because, he's come up with this theory that I really like. He talks about cultural racism, which sounds kind of racist to me. But he says that whereas we used to say, what used to be said was racial minorities are just biologically predisposed to be lazy. I'm not saying that, but that was a theory or a way of racist thinking that used to exist. Now we say, well, people are just culturally different. And in Latino culture, the whole siesta thing. And so it's just a culture that values leisure more than it values hard work to make money. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's just cultural differences, which obviously you could say, okay, but that's gonna, if you have that in the context of a structurally racist society already, that's going to lead to that is going to allow us to just accept racially unequal outcomes on the basis of, well, that's just how this particular group of people are. Okay, and the fourth one is the idea of the minimization of racism. I don't have to be racist to say, hey, you know what? America is way better off racially in the year that I'm recording this at 2021, this year, than it was. Yeah, we're struggling with things, but it's better than the 1950s were. It's better than the 1910s were. So the idea is, like, things are better. And realistically, even though we've got plenty of vocal racists, the number of people who express racist attitudes has shrunk over time. In the 1800s, basically every white person was kind of racist or very racist. And now we see attitudes toward about race. There are still racist people, but their numbers have declined. And so, hey, you know what? Things are better now. That's the idea of the minimization of racism, which obviously just completely ignores institutional discrimination and structural racism, and the fact that, you know, having one racist person is probably more than what we need to have. So any of these are things that Bonilla Silva calls frames of colorblind racism. You don't have to be a racist person to believe any of those things, but none of them do anything to dismantle structural racism. They are all ideologies that say things are pretty good the way they are. And if you're going to believe that, you're going to contribute to the perpetuation of racist outcomes. Okay, that's it for colorblind racism. A theory that I personally find really attractive, because one of the things it does is it tells people just because you're not racist doesn't mean you're not contributing to racism. It's not, ideally, it's not a big finger pointing thing. But what it's saying is, in the context of racism, it's not enough to just not be racist. It's like if a person is drowning, it's not enough to not push their head under. That would obviously be bad. But just sitting by and saying, I'm going to treat the drowning person the same as I'm going to treat the person who is swimming easily, I'm contributing to a death there, right? Okay, that's the main point. That's it for this video. I'll see you guys in the next one.